There is a small city in southern Oregon where more theater is produced than in almost any other city on the West Coast. In the foothills of the Cascades, in the Rogue River Valley, Ashland has become an important center for the fine and performing arts, primarily because, of its 15,000 residents, one is Shakespeare. The Oregon Shakespeare Festival, winner of the 1983 Antoinette Perry or Tony Award for consistent excellence as a regional theater, has filled more than 3.25 million seats during its almost 50-year existence. One of America's largest repertory theaters, with 10 or more plays in repertory over an 8-month season on 3 separate stages, the festival sells more than 250,000 tickets every year.
People say, well, how did this ever come to be? And to get the real answer for that, I think you have to go back to about the turn of the century, 1895 or so, when Ashland was on the Chautauqua circuit. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that, but there were some money people in the East who raised funds to promote culture and entertainment to the westernmost wild parts of the states. If the town would put up some kind of building or tent to have these events in, Ashland built a dome.
Before the popularity of Chautauqua waned, 2 more domes were built, the last of which stood upon the walls which now surround the festival's Elizabethan stage. A college town since 1882, Ashland was also popular for its mineral springs and Lithia Park, which provided a home away from home for the city's visitors. The city had, by 1930, more than its share of experience in the role of cultural hotspot and tourist attraction. The stock market crash of 1929 marked the beginning of the worst depression the country had ever known. In Ashland, hard times came as hard as elsewhere, but joblessness and its empty hours also brought a kind of blessing. It was in this soil that one man, Angus Bowmer, his first wife Lois, and a few of their friends set about building the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. In September of 1931, Angus Bowmer began teaching English and drama at the Southern Oregon Normal School.
I remember it very clearly. The first day when I signed up to go to the Southern Oregon Normal School, it was called then, and I was very wild to get on the stage. I wanted to be in a play. And I went up to the auditorium after I had signed up and was prying around in that little auditorium up there. And 2 people came in, a man and a woman, who I thought were other students. They were very young. And we got to talking, and I said, I want to get on that stage. And the man said, well, you sign up for my classes and I'll put you on there. I'm the one who will do it. So I became friendly with Angus and his first wife, Lois, right from the start.
In the next 4 years, a talented group of friends emerged who, with Angus and Lois, would found the festival in 1935. Friends like Maxine Gearhart, George Smith, Audrey Laughlin, and Bob Stedman. In 1933, the roof of the old abandoned Chautauqua building was removed. Angus noticed, and plans for the festival gained momentum.
One day he called me and said, here, I want to show you something. And so I came over and he got in his car and we went up on the high drive up here, and he looked down over on this, in this thing and said, what is that? And I said, that's a Shakespearean theater. And he said, yes, and one of these days we're going to have a Shakespearean festival in here.
Were you skeptical of Angus's plans when he first started talking to you about them?
No, we were, somehow or other, there was something about Gus and I that we, just together like this, whenever we begin to talk, we knew what we were doing, and the other one knew what the other guy was thinking, and it worked out pretty well.
By 1935, the Ashland Chamber of Commerce was sponsoring the first Shakespeare Festival during the city's 4th of July celebration. The WPA had built an Elizabethan stage within the walls of Chautauqua, and the circle of friends had grown to include townspeople, Elliot McCracken, Dorothy Pruitt, Gordon Claycomb, and others. Twelfth Night was brought to the new stage along with The Merchant of Venice, produced by Angus earlier that spring at the Normal School. So began the period of intense growth and hard work of the first years.
Well, remember that this was in 1935, and that was Depression time, and we, as young people, didn't have the money to be doing things, and this was really our entertainment.
Nobody, but nobody got
paid.
But there was nothing to hold the company together except camaraderie and pleasure in the work that we were doing.
So I said, yes, Angus, I think that would be fun. Yes, you could count me in.
And I have said since then that I did not work for nothing, because the experience and the associations that I had during those years have compounded over and over and continue. I continue to gain from that experience. And as I've said before, had I been working at the Five and Dime, I would have bought another lipstick and it would be gone.
It was the time to do it.
I never was frightened. Actually, once you make the decision, then you can't be frightened. You hold your nose and jump in with both feet, you know.
This is the way I think that the thing kept going, because he could make everybody work and make it fun.
And to get the very best out of each individual, I think that was one of his great talents.
He was able to do his own roles well, and yet he had this, well, he inspired us all to really get in and give.
Elliot, how did we get the sign for our theater?
Angus was out trying to raise some money to help put the show on, and so he could pay as he went. And so he went out to one of the mills and talked to the owner, who looked at him and also looked at the main rig on the mill, and along came a slab off the butt end of a tree that was a rather peculiar shape. And he said, well, if you want something from me, you can have that. And Angus may have been a little abashed, but he was always pointed in the I'm going to win direction. And so he brought it over, and I was here when the thing came, and they asked him, what's it for? And he said, well, I think we can make a sign out of it.
I happened to be in the library, and this very attractive woman was looking over the magazine racks, and someone said, that is Mrs. Bowmer. And I looked at her, and it just clicked all of a sudden. She looked up and smiled at me, and I smiled at her, and that was the beginning of a wonderful friendship.
She was like Gus. She could get people, pretty soon, why, here would be a lot of people around helping her, and having more fun than you could shake a stick at, you know. She
was a most wonderful person, really. She designed all the costumes, drew the designs, made the patterns, sewed the costumes.
She was a delight to work for. We all loved her, and she really was an inspiration. Even now, when I am doing sewing of my own, on my own, I very often say, I wouldn't know how to do this if it had not been for Lois Bowmer.
Lois was a very fine costume designer and was able to take practically nothing, scraps of this and scraps of that, and put together creditable costumes.
We made the costumes at the Bowmers' apartment on their lawn when we used the treadle machines.
A lot of draperies were donated, and of course they were wonderful, brocade and stuff like that. And of course, and then we used potato blocking for any designs we needed.
We made our first tights out of excess old Army underwear, which we dyed and sewed up the crotches and took them in and made tights of them.
So I remember that first year, our costume budget was $60.
The newspaper became very amused because they took all of this with a grain of salt. Those kids in Ashland starting a Shakespeare Festival, no way, you know, that was kind of their idea. But they went along with it beautifully, published all of the copy, we presented them and elaborated on it, gave us lots of space.
During those earlier years, there was borrow if you can, get gifts if they will give to you. I won't really say steal if you can't, but buy if you have to.
You today have hundreds of support personnel. You have these, to me, beautiful dressing rooms. When I remember ours were just the back of the stage, you know, with a few lights strung up.
All the seats were good.
Oh, sure.
You were almost on the stage. but they weren't very comfortable.
I built a lot of what we call spots, but they were made out of stovepipe.
We had a prompter. I don't know whether you use a prompter or not, but we did. And under the forestage, there was a little space that was about 2 by 4, and the girl that was the prompter had to crawl on her hands and knees from the back of the stage up into that place. And yet she did it gladly for rehearsals and the show. And I think she did it all up until the war. And that was just typical of the feeling that we had.
Bob Stedman and I lived at Angus's house in the summers when we were working on the festival. And the Teensy Weensy Theater was their breakfast nook, where we met twice a day, usually, and had meetings and discussed points and got together with a lot of laughter and fun. And I think it started out, as I remember, I had heard of the Very Little Theater in Eugene. And as I recall, I said, let's call this the Very, Very Little Theater. And Angus spoke up and said, why not the Teensy Weensy Theater?
We would go there after the rehearsals. Everybody was tired and upset and hungry and mad at so-and-so, and we would go there and get everything all ironed out.
We didn't realize you couldn't do all the things we did. If we hadn't have, if we had known that we couldn't do all that stuff, we wouldn't have done it.
I mean, before you left, it wasn't a problem. It was funny.
I do remember the night that the 6 of us talked all night, and the sun came up, and we scrambled some more eggs, and we talked all day.
It was something that we needed at the time, I think, to get things started and to get it started right.
Was there rather early on any sense of developing the Elizabethan decor, that is in costumes and in staging, where you began to have a sense of the Elizabethan style?
We didn't have a sense of style.
Okay, tell me about
We
that.
kind of built our own kind of Shakespeare.
How Elizabethan we were as actors is highly questionable.
In those days, we didn't have any kind of Shakespeare that we were consciously aping or copying. We tried to play those roles in such a way that the audience would recognize people out of their own contemporary lives. When I played Corin the shepherd, I played him like a sheepherder, and because I could relate to sheepherders. I didn't know how to play Shakespeare, but I knew how to herd sheep. So I just proceeded to herd sheep, be a sheepherder.
Nobody said, well, this is not the way to do Shakespeare. Shakespeare should have scenery, and Shakespeare should have Mendelssohn, and so on and so forth. We had no one objecting to the way we were going, although we were obviously far out as far as the general trend in Shakespearean production was at that time.
We were pretty lucky that we could get enough the main characters that could do a pretty good job. And the small parts began to get pretty thin.
Now, it's true that in the lesser characters, we got down to, we sort of ran out of people and we cast anybody who could walk. But the main characters in that first Twelfth Night, was more delightful and funnier than anyone I've ever seen. Angus's Sir Toby Belch was an absolute delight. Bob Stedman's Feste was the most marvelous Feste anyone could ever imagine. George Francis Smith's Malvolio was touching, pathetic, arrogant, stupid, ridiculous, clownish, but it was human.
The company improved as actors and actresses were brought from Seattle's Cornish Institute by Bill Cottrell. Actresses Dorothy Pruitt and Doreen Leverett toured the state in costume. In 1939, PR man Gordon Claycomb packed the entire company off to the World's Fair on Treasure Island to perform both on stage and on live NBC radio. The public responded, but exactly how well has become a bit fuzzy.
Do you remember how many tickets you sold?
Well, I think about 500 came through the 3 plays.
Well, I believe we had 600 on the first night.
I'd say maybe 300, 350.
Per night?
Yes.
Did you ever think it would become so big when you were putting stovepipes in front of 300-watt lamps?
We always knew that it was going to go.
But there was always that in the back of the mind that this would grow and be a great and powerful theater.
I knew that we were pretty good, but I didn't even dream it would be anything like this. I don't think anybody had dreamed that it would ever end up this way.
I never dreamed it would evolve into what it is now.
To realize that what has happened from what we started, and if we had not done a fairly good job, I think that it probably wouldn't have got off its feet.
I don't think we felt fear at any time. We were terribly, we were like children in school learning to fly a kite.
Until 1939, the company had little reason for fear. Angus had organized a supportive board of directors. Box office growth and critical acclaim had come easily. 500 attended in 1935. Those numbers grew to 2,000 by 1938. But there was no audience growth in 1939. Europe felt tremors of war as early as 1936. By 1939, so did the rest of the world.
Germany invades Poland in the Free State of Danzig. The efforts and hopes of diplomats for peaceful settlement are transformed into the roar of gunfire.
The war had its effect in Ashland. Angus was concerned that attendance hadn't increased in 1939, and because of the war, he thought the festival might lose money for the first season in its history in 1940. But there were personal problems as well.
When the word came out that Angus and Lois were separating, estranging, I think the word was used then, it was rather a shock, except to a few of us who had felt the tension mounting and the conflict building the year before. But we were very sad. I assumed there would be no festival that year.
Why do you think Angus decided not to produce the festival in 1940?
I think it was the strain of the relationship, and he felt that he simply wanted to take a season out to get his head together and to relax and to look into some further education that he was interested in down at Stanford.
He brought it up to the board that maybe the time was, because of many factors, that one should call a halt to the festival.
I think, actually, Angus didn't have the heart to do it that year. And he felt that the festival automatically would wait for him until he was ready.
The board didn't interfere in any way until Angus wanted to stop the festival.
Well, Lois Bowmer called me on the phone one morning, and she said, Dottie, the board of directors have voted for Bill and me to continue the festival. She said, we're going to try it. Now, will you come and help us?
There were no people around then who could even try to direct Shakespeare. So I directed 4 Shakespearean shows simultaneously.
That seems exhausting to me.
Well, it seems incredible, insane looking back on it.
Yeah.
But we got them on.
They managed another successful season, with attendance only slightly below what it had been the year before. Of the original group, only Lois, Bill, Dorothy, and George worked that summer. Bob and Audrey, now married, had other commitments. Elliot was at school, and Maxine had married and moved away. With 2 performances left that season, a fire backstage ruined many of the costumes. But George persuaded the local National Guard to contribute uniforms, and the show went on. Bill Cottrell returned to Hollywood after that 1940 season. Later, he would make a name for himself in movies and on the stage. But less than a year after his return to Southern California, he was drafted. Angus and Lois divorced in the spring of 1940. Lois left the Rogue Valley after her final season as art director for the festival. She died several years later. Angus spent part of the dramatic summer of 1940 at Stanford. That winter, he married Gertrude Butler. And in August of 1942, he was drafted. As the war began for the United States, the ranks of the U.S. Army included Sir Toby Belch, Feste, Malvolio, and Corin the Shepherd.
America goes to war. Men of the Army, Navy, and Marines reinforce the battlefronts on 6 continents.
The war effort got everyone involved.
Buy a bond, and by, the bonds you buy'll bring you victory.
By 1945, the war was winding down, and victory found Angus alive and back to work in Ashland.
It must have been the summer of 1946. I remember in that summer that Angus came to me and said, "Do you want to take a drive with me?" And I said, "Sure." I said, "Where are we going?" And he said, "Well, I'll show you." We came out here where the old Chautauqua building had been and where the theater had been, and it had burned. And at that time, all that was there was the wall and literally a hole in the ground, because after the theater had burned, I think they had knocked out all the burned material. And he started to talk about reviving the festival.
Oh, he was always talking about it and stirring up interest and so forth.
I was asked by the Secretary of the Chamber of Commerce if I would start the festival. And having learned a great deal in the 6 years before the war, I realized that the strength of the festival was the possession by the citizens of this community. So I said, no, I won't start the festival, but if the community will start the festival, I'm available.
What made him decide he wanted to be paid?
Well, he had somehow learned in the intervening years that if people pay for something, they think more of it than if they get it free.
The arrangements were made partly with the city and partly with funds that the Festival Association had to get a new and improved theater structure. A lot of houses were being built then, and it was difficult to get electricians to work. So he came up to see me, and I told him that I was trying to get our house back in shape, and I didn't feel I could do it. And so he left, and the next day he came back and said, "You have to do it."
And we borrowed lighting controls from the Shrine. We borrowed them from Medford High School. We borrowed them from the Ashland High School. We borrowed them from the college.
He and Otto Wilda flew down to San Francisco and got costumes for that first year and rented them.
I'm having a terrible time in my English class, and a young English professor by the name of Bowmer found out that I was an electrician in the Navy. And he said he'd make me a deal. He said he'd guarantee me an English grade if I would do the lighting and help do the electrical work for this festival he was going to put on next summer.
He talked beautifully, but he didn't write very well. Business letters.
Gertrude was, well, Angus's right hand.
So I just took over all his correspondence, because if I didn't, it didn't get done.
But she was always with Gus. She was always patting him on the back. Do you follow me? She was, she sat in on the casting. She was here for rehearsals.
What were your responsibilities as art director that first year?
I think Jack of all trades would have been a better title for it. I did everything, really. I think I helped with the lights. I made all the props, even made armor plate, helmets, that type of thing. I sometimes was on that stage when the sun was breaking in the east.
It was a big, how are you going to get ready in time to open year? And they were still hammering at 7 o'clock on the day that it opened.
1947 proved to be another successful season in the long line of successful seasons which are the festival's history. It was the gentle strength of the dream that guided Angus and his growing group of friends through the obstacles of the years to come.
Did he ever talk about his own vision of the future of the festival?
I'm sure he thought about it, but he didn't talk about it.
He was one of the doers and not one of the talkers.
Yes. Well, he talked too. And very well, always.
Was he pleased with the festival?
It was his whole life. That came first, always. I was second, but that was all right with me.
I don't know that he ever sat down to me and outlined it, but in knowing Angus and talking to him, the idea of what is now a reality was basically Gus's dream.
He liked people, and he got along with them. Brought out their best.
A combination of the artistry, knowing the public, knowing finances, knowing artists, and most of all, having patience.
Gus, I don't think in all the years that I knew him ever said a word to me in anger, in spite of the fact that I think there were times when probably he was justified.
I don't know that he ever pushed anything at me or at anybody else. He was not that kind of man. But he demonstrated in his life and in his work the kind of value that the theater is founded on. And that value, to me, and I think to most of the people who have had experience at Ashland, is so strong that it dominates our life.
Our theater was founded and nurtured not to win prizes, however pleasant and rewarding they are, but in the certain knowledge that by cultivating an art of illusion, we might arrive at something like a truth. The Antoinette Perry Award is testament to our achievement, past and present, and it is a pleasure to share it with Angus and Gertrude Bowmer and the hundreds who have worked in Ashland over the years. But it is also permanently true that what's past is prologue, what to come in yours and my discharge.
Would you read this for me?
What a fortunate person I am, and he believed that. He said, he hardly missed a day saying how lucky we were. I have been allowed almost twice as many years of my life involved with the production of Shakespeare's plays as he was given to write the lot. The Oregon Shakespeare Festival has been producing on the same spot for 43 years, less 7 out for World War II. The festival has been a part of my life for so long that I cannot imagine what life would be without it. I would not trade places with any living creature.
Did you enjoy acting?
Why else did I start the festival? You know, nobody else would cast me, so the surest way of getting cast is to start your own theater.
There were, in those days, a certain segment of Ashland who resented those wild, long-haired Shakespearean actors. One of the young girls, our young actresses, married one of them. Others locked up their daughters and said, keep away from those wild creatures.
Had I been working at the Five and Dime, I would have bought another lipstick and it would be gone.
Those were primitive times.
Lois would say, well, maybe you better take this shirt and work it up for Bob if you have any spare time. Well, of course, I had my eyes on Bob. So I had plenty of spare time.
We always knew that it was going to go.